In the late summer of 1977, the search for intelligence beyond our world was not conducted in a high-tech government bunker or a glistening, futuristic laboratory. It was happening in a field in Delaware, Ohio, surrounded by corn and the quiet hum of the American Midwest. The tool of choice was the Big Ear, a radio telescope that looked less like a window to the stars and more like a sprawling metal grid resting on the ground. It was an instrument the size of 3 football fields, designed to listen to the silent roar of the universe. For the astronomers and volunteers involved, the work was monotonous. There were no headphones to wear, no static to listen to in the hopes of hearing a voice cut through the noise. The Big Ear did not produce audio. It produced paper, an IBM 1130 mainframe computer, a machine that would now be considered an antique, processed the radio waves collected by the telescope, and printed outlines of alphanumeric characters. Every few days, a volunteer would collect the stack of perforated computer paper and pore over the columns of numbers and letters, looking for something that broke the pattern of background radiation. This was the routine for Jerry Amon, a professor and volunteer researcher who had dedicated his time to the project. On a quiet evening in August, he sat down to review the data logs from a few nights prior. The date of the recording was August 15th, 1977. The time was shortly after 11:16 in the evening Eastern Daylight Time. The universe, as far as the Big Ear was concerned, was usually a quiet place, represented on the page by low numbers like 1s and 2s, indicating the standard low-level hiss of cosmic background noise. Occasionally, a higher number might appear, perhaps a 4 or a 5, representing a known radio source or a passing satellite. But as Amon moved his eyes down the page, scanning the endless columns of data, he stopped. Midway down the sheet, the low hum of the universe suddenly spiked. The code shifted violently from the mundane to the extraordinary. The sequence began with a 6, then climbed instantly to E, then Q, then U, then dropped back to J, and finally 5. In the system used by the observatory, numbers 1 through 9 represented low signal intensity. Letters A through Z represented increasingly higher intensity. The letter U was massive. It indicated a signal 30 times louder than the background noise of deep space. It was a shout across the void. Amon grabbed a red pen. He did not call the press, nor did he panic. He simply circled the 6 vertical characters, 6 equage 5, and wrote a single word in the margin, his handwriting looping and emphatic. Well, that marginalia would give the anomaly its name. But the implications of what Amon had circled were far more complex than a simple exclamation. To understand why this specific sequence caused a researcher to pause. One must understand the mechanics of the big ear. The telescope was fixed in place. It used the rotation of the Earth to scan the sky. It could not track an object. It could only listen as the planet turned, and the telescope's field of view swept across the heavens like a spotlight beam. Because of the speed of the Earth's rotation, the big ear could observe any specific point in the sky for exactly 72 seconds. If a signal were coming from a star, a galaxy, or an artificial transmitter fixed in deep space, it would first appear faintly as it entered the telescope's beam, rise to a peak intensity when it was directly in the center, and then fade away as the Earth turned the telescope away from it. The pattern of intensity would look like a bell curve. When Eamon analyzed the data of the WOW signal, the rise and fall were perfect. The signal lasted exactly 72 seconds. It started low, climbed to a crescendo at the letter U, and then vanished. This duration was the smoking gun. It meant the signal was not terrestrial. It was not a passing airplane, which would have crossed the beam too quickly. It was not a satellite, which would have had a different trajectory. And it was not a glitch in the computer, which would likely have been instantaneous or erratic. This signal originated from a fixed point among the stars, and the Earth had turned past it. The frequency of the signal added another layer of intrigue. The transmission arrived at 20.4 megahertz. To a layperson, this number is meaningless. To an astronomer, it is the most significant frequency in the universe. It is the frequency at which neutral hydrogen, the most abundant element in the cosmos, emits energy. This frequency is often referred to as the hydrogen line. Decades prior, physicists famously theorized that if an intelligent civilization wanted to communicate across the galaxy, they would use this specific frequency. It stands out against the cosmic static. It is a universal constant, known to any society that has mastered basic astronomy. It is a quiet channel in a noisy universe, a place where watchers might agree to meet. This concept is sometimes called the water hole, a celestial meeting ground. The WOW signal had arrived precisely at this frequency. It was as if someone had walked into a crowded room and whistled the one tune everyone knew to listen for. Eamon and the team at the observatory scrambled to follow up. The data indicated the signal came from the constellation Sagittarius, a dense region of the sky near the Chi Sagittarii star group. The coordinates were specific, pointing to a patch of space that appeared empty to the naked eye, but was crowded with distant stars. The excitement was palpable, but it was tempered by the rigorous skepticism required of science. The first assumption was not aliens, it was interference. Was it a secret military transmission, a reflection of a signal from Earth bouncing bouncing off space debris. The team checked logs of satellites and aircraft. They looked for known celestial bodies like pulsars or quasars that might have emitted a burst of radio waves. Nothing fit. A pulsar would emit regular pulses, not a singular 72-second surge. A secret military satellite would not likely transmit on the protected hydrogen line, which is reserved internationally for astronomical purposes. Furthermore, a signal from Earth would not have matched the drift pattern of the stars so perfectly. If the source had been on Earth, the telescope would have picked it up differently as the planet rotated. The signal moved with the star field, implying it was light years away. The intensity of the signal was also baffling. It was narrowband, meaning it was focused on a very specific frequency, rather than spread out across the spectrum like a natural emission from a star. Nature is usually messy. It broadcasts noise across a wide range. Technology is precise. The WOW signal was sharp, clear, and immensely powerful. For a transmitter to send a signal that's strong from the distance of Sagittarius, it would require an energy source vastly superior to anything humanity possessed at the time. In the days and weeks that followed, the staff at the Big Ear turned the telescope back to that same spot in Sagittarius. They waited for the shout to return. Jerry Amon watched the printouts. Other astronomers joined the watch. They listened to the silence of the hydrogen line, hoping for a repeat of the 6 EQUJ5 sequence. But the sky remained dark. The printer churned out rows of 1s and 2s. The anomaly had vanished as quickly as it had appeared. This absence of a repeat signal became the central problem of the mystery. In science, reproducibility is everything. If you cannot make an experiment happen twice, you cannot prove it is real. A one-time event, no matter how compelling, is technically anecdotal. It sits in a gray area between fact and error. Without a second transmission, they could not triangulate the distance or decode a message. There was no message, in fact, just a carrier wave. It was like hearing a phone ring once in an empty house. You know someone called, but you do not know who, and they did not leave a voicemail. The psychological impact of the incident on the team was significant. They had held in their hands a piece of paper that looked exactly like the theoretical prediction of an extraterrestrial contact. It checked every box: the frequency, the duration, the intensity, the source location. Yet the inability to find it again cast a shadow of doubt. Was it a transient phenomenon of nature that we simply do not understand? A burst of energy from a dying star that happened to mimic an artificial signal? Or was it a sweeping beam from a civilization that turned its transmitter toward Earth for a brief moment and then moved on, never to look our way again? The data logs from that August night were analyzed and reanalyzed for years. Computer models were built to simulate possible sources. Skeptics tried to attribute it to comets. Specifically, a theory emerged decades later, suggesting that clouds of hydrogen surrounding passing comets might have caused the spike. However, this theory faced criticism regarding the exact frequency and the fact that comets would not have produced such a sharp, focused rise and fall. The signal remained stubborn in its uniqueness. As the years passed, the Big Ear Observatory was eventually dismantled. The land sold and developed. The physical instrument that caught the voice from Sagittarius is gone, replaced by a golf course. But the red-circled paper remains one of the most unsettling documents in the history of astronomy. It represents a moment where humanity looked out into the dark and saw something looking back, or at least something that flashed a light in our direction. The incident left a lingering question that is arguably more haunting than the signal itself. If it was a message, why did they only send it once? We are accustomed to the idea that contact would be a persistent, dramatic event. We imagine continuous broadcasts, mathematical primers, a dialogue. We rarely consider the possibility of a brief, indifferent hail. The WOW signal stands as a monument to the unknown. It is a ghost story told in alphanumeric code. For 72 seconds, the universe was not silent. Something happened in the direction of Sagittarius. Something that traversed the vast distance between the stars and washed over a wire mesh in Ohio. It was loud, it was precise, and then it was gone. The paper trail ends there, leaving us with the silence that followed. A silence that has now lasted for nearly half a century. The printout itself looks remarkably mundane. It is a ream of tractor feed computer paper, the kind with perforated edges and alternating green and white bars that defined data processing in the 1970s. To the untrained eye, it is simply a chaotic wall of numbers and letters, a digital scramble representing the background static of the universe. But for Jerry Amon, a volunteer astronomer at the Ohio State University Radio Observatory, looking at that paper was like finding a single gold coin in a landfill the size of a continent. He circled the vertical column of 6 characters in red ink. Next to them, in a hurried, cursive hand, he wrote a single exclamation of pure, unadulterated astonishment. Well, that marginalia gave the event its name. But the ink tells us nothing about the strangeness of what actually happened on August 15th, 1977. To understand why this event remains the most compelling piece of evidence in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, we have to look past the excitement and dissect the anomalies themselves. When we peel back the layers of the WOW signal, we are left with a set of characteristics that defy natural explanation. and dismiss terrestrial interference with unsettling precision. The first anomaly is the intensity. The Big Ear Telescope, a massive instrument the size of 3 football fields, was designed to listen to the faint whispers of the cosmos. The receiver measured the strength of incoming radio waves and printed a corresponding character every 12 seconds. A blank space meant the signal was at the baseline noise level. The numbers 1 through 9 represented increasing intensity above that background. For anything stronger than a 9, the computer cycled through the alphabet. In the days leading up to the event, the printouts were mostly blank spaces and low numbers, the sleepy hum of the galaxy. But at roughly 10:15 in the evening, the telescope was hit by a surge of energy that maxed out the system. The sequence read 6, EQUJ5. Translated into a graph, this is not a random spike. It is a perfect bell curve. The signal rose from nothing, climbed rapidly to a peak intensity represented by the letter U, which indicated a signal 30 times stronger than the background noise, and then receded back into the silence just as smoothly as it had arrived. In the world of radio astronomy, a signal of that magnitude is akin to a shout in a library. It was not a subtle hint. It was a broadcast of immense power. However, intensity alone does not rule out a natural origin. Stars, pulsars, and quasars emit powerful radio waves. This brings us to the second, and perhaps most critical, anomaly: the frequency. The universe is a noisy place, filled with the static of dying stars and cosmic radiation. But there is a specific frequency that astronomers call the water hole. It sits at 1420 megahertz. This is the frequency at which hydrogen, the most abundant element in the universe, emits energy. It is a universal constant. If an intelligent civilization wanted to communicate across the vastness of space, they would likely choose a frequency that any other astronomer, anywhere in the galaxy, would already be watching. It is the cosmic equivalent of a meeting place. The Big Ear was tuned to listen to 50 channels around this frequency. The WOW signal appeared on channel 2. It did not bleed into the adjacent channels. It was precise, centered almost exactly on the hydrogen line. This creates a significant problem for the natural explanation theory. Nature is messy. Natural radio sources, like the chaotic emissions from Jupiter or the turbulent energy of a quasar, are broadband. They smear across a wide range of frequencies, like hitting all the keys on a piano at once. The WOW signal was narrowband. It hit a single key. The bandwidth was less than 10 kilohertz wide. We do not know of any natural celestial process that can generate a radio signal that tight, that focused, and that powerful. It looked, for all intents and purposes, like a transmission from an artificial transmitter. The skeptics, quite rightly, looked to Earth. Could it have been a secret military satellite? A reflected television broadcast? A stray signal from an airplane? This is where the third anomaly, the duration, acts as a filter. The Big Ear was a transit telescope. It was fixed to the ground and could not steer. It relied on the rotation of the Earth to scan the sky. As the planet turned, the telescope swept across the heavens like a radar beam. Given the width of the antenna's sensitivity pattern and the speed of the Earth's rotation, any point source in the sky, a star, a galaxy, or a distant transmitter, would be audible to the telescope for exactly 72 seconds. It would take 36 seconds for the object to move from the edge of the beam to the center, reaching peak intensity, and another 36 seconds to fade away as the Earth carried the telescope past it. The WOW signal lasted exactly 72 seconds. This timing is the smoking gun that rules out terrestrial interference. An airplane or a satellite moves independently of the background stars. If a plane had flown overhead, the signal would have been brief and erratic. If a satellite had been broadcasting, it likely would have stayed in range for a different duration, depending on its orbit. For the signal to last exactly 72 seconds and exhibit that perfect rise and fall in intensity, the source had to be fixed among the stars, moving at the exact sidereal rate of the celestial sphere. It came from deep space. There is almost no debate on this point. The signal originated from outside our atmosphere, from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius. But just as the data seems to lock into place, the fourth anomaly throws the entire investigation into disarray. This is the mystery of the second horn. The Big Ear used 2 feed horns to collect radio waves, positioned slightly apart. Think of them as 2 separate eyes looking at the sky. Because of the Earth's rotation, the second horn would sweep over the exact same patch of sky roughly 3 minutes after the first horn. This dual-feed system was designed to filter out local interference. If a signal came from a car engine or a lightning strike nearby, it would hit both horns instantly. If a signal came from space, it would hit one horn, and then 3 minutes later, it would hit the other. The WOW signal appeared in one of the horns, but 3 minutes later, when the second horn looked at the exact same coordinates, the signal was gone. The implications of this are deeply frustrating for researchers. It implies that the signal was transient. It suggests that whatever source generated this massive burst of energy either turned on or turned off within that narrow 3-minute window. Or perhaps more unsettling, the beam was sweeping across the galaxy like the light from a lighthouse, and Earth was briefly caught in the flash before the beam moved on. If it was a lighthouse beam, the rotation of the source would have to be incredibly fast, or the beam incredibly narrow to miss the second look. If it was a deliberate transmission, the sender ceased broadcasting mere moments after we began listening. Astronomers scrambled. They returned to the coordinates in Sagittarius again and again. Amen himself continued to watch that spot. In the decades since, we have pointed far more sensitive instruments at the region near the star group Chi Sagittarii. We have listened for hours, days, and weeks. We have heard nothing but the cold hiss of background radiation. The signal never repeated. This lack of repetition is the final, maddening anomaly. Science relies on repeatability. If you cannot reproduce the result, you cannot prove the hypothesis. In the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, a one-time event is indistinguishable from a ghost. Without a second signal, we cannot measure its distance. We cannot determine if it was encoded with complex data, because the Big Ear's computer was not advanced enough to record the audio, only the intensity. We have the loudness, but not the song. We are left with a paradox. The signal looked exactly like what we predicted an alien transmission would look like. It was on the right frequency, the hydrogen line. It had the artificial, narrow bandwidth. It came from the stars, proven by the 72-second drift. And yet, it behaved like a phantom, appearing for a single minute in human history, and then vanishing forever. Some have suggested comets surrounded by hydrogen clouds caused the reading, a theory proposed in 2016. However, that theory faces stiff criticism regarding the frequency and the fact that comets do not typically emit such strong radio waves at that specific bandwidth. Others hold to the belief that it was a classified military project that somehow mimicked the sidereal motion of the stars. Though the logistics of such a deception in 1977 seem improbable, the anomaly remains. It sits there in the data, a perfect mathematical spike rising out of the mediocrity of the background noise. It is a question mark that has hung over the field of astronomy for nearly half a century. We know exactly what it wasn't. It wasn't a plane. It wasn't a planet. It wasn't a glitch in the computer, as the characters were printed clearly and followed the physics of the telescope's reception pattern perfectly. The WOW signal forces us to confront the possibility that we may have been hailed. It forces us to consider that in the vast, dark ocean of the cosmos, a ship passed in the night, flashed its light once, and continued on its way. The silence that has followed is not proof of absence. It is simply the resumption of the status quo. But for 72 seconds, the status quo was shattered, and the data proves that something out there, in the direction of Sagittarius, briefly screamed into the void at a frequency we were just clever enough to be listening to. The red pen circle around the alphanumeric sequence 6 EQUJ5 remains the most famous piece of marginalia in the history of astronomy. It captures the initial rush of discovery, the adrenaline of realizing that the universe might finally be speaking back. But the story of the WOW signal does not end with that circle. In fact, that was merely the beginning of a long, quiet, and deeply frustrating journey into a labyrinth of dead ends. For decades, astronomers, physicists, and amateur sleuths have tried to retrace the steps of that signal, hoping to find the path back to its source. Instead, they have found only closed doors and silence. The first dead end was the immediate silence that followed the event. In the days following August 15th, 1972, Jerry Amon and the staff at the Big Ear Radio Telescope did exactly what any scientist would do. They turned the ear back to the source. The telescope was not a steerable dish like those seen in movies. It relied on the rotation of the Earth to scan the sky. To listen to the same spot again, they had to wait for the planet to bring the constellation Sagittarius back into the line of sight. They waited. They listened. They tuned their receivers to the hydrogen line, the frequency of 1,420 megahertz, hoping for a repeat performance. There was nothing. The background static of the cosmos returned to its normal, incoherent hiss. This lack of recurrence is the primary stumbling block for the entire investigation. Science relies on repeatability. If you drop an apple, it falls. If you mix certain chemicals, they react. But if a radio telescope picks up a signal 30 times stronger than the background noise for exactly 72 seconds, and then never hears it again, it defies the scientific method. It becomes an anecdote rather than data. The researchers scrutinized the printouts from the days leading up to the event and the days following it. They looked for weaker echoes or fragments of the signal. They found absolutely nothing. It was as if a spotlight had been swept across the face of the Earth for a brief moment and then extinguished forever. As the years passed, the search for a natural explanation became a desperate attempt to categorize the anomaly. One by one, natural theories were proposed, investigated, and ultimately discarded. The first logical assumption was that the signal came from a terrestrial source, perhaps a military aircraft, a satellite, or even a reflected broadcast from Earth itself had bounced off a piece of space debris. This theory, however, ran into a significant wall. The frequency of 1,420 megahertz is a protected band. By international agreement, no transmitters are allowed to operate on this frequency because it is reserved for astronomical observation. While it is true that humans often break rules, a signal of that intensity would require a significant amount of power. Furthermore, the characteristics of the signal did not match the behavior of a moving object like an airplane or a low-orbit satellite. Because the big ear was fixed to the ground, a stationary source in the sky would appear to drift through the telescope's beam for exactly 72 seconds due to the rotation of the Earth. The WOW signal fit this profile perfectly. It rose in intensity for 36 seconds, peaked, and then faded for 36 seconds. If the source had been a plane flying overhead, the signal would have spiked and dropped erratically. If it had been a satellite, its orbit would likely have caused it to stay in the beam for a different duration. The signal behaved exactly like something anchored to the stars. Yet, it refused to stay there when they looked again. Another tantalizing dead end involved the design of the telescope itself. The big ear had 2 feed horns, essentially 2 separate receivers located side by side. As the Earth rotated, a source in the sky would pass through the first horn, and then, approximately 3 minutes later, it would pass through the second horn. This was a mechanism used to filter out local interference. A signal from deep space should appear in both horns, while a glitch inside the observatory would likely only appear in one. The WOW signal appeared in only one of the horns. This detail has haunted investigators for decades. If the signal was from deep space, it should have been heard twice. The fact that it was not implies that the source turned on or off within that 3-minute window. It either started transmitting right as it entered the second horn, or it stopped transmitting right after it left the first. While this does not disprove an artificial origin, it adds a layer of complexity that makes natural explanations nearly impossible to fit. Natural cosmic events, like pulsars or quasars, do not typically switch on and off with such convenient timing relative to a telescope in Ohio. In more recent years, a new hypothesis emerged that promised to solve the riddle, only to lead to yet another dead end. In 2016, a professor named Antonio Paris proposed that the signal might have been caused by a pair of comets, specifically comets known as 266P and P 2008 Y2. These comets were not known to be in the area back in 1977, but backward calculations of their orbits suggested they might have been passing through the vicinity of the Sagittarius constellation at the time. The theory was that the comets were surrounded by massive clouds of hydrogen gas. Since hydrogen emits radio waves at exactly 1,420 megahertz, Paris suggested that the big ear had simply detected this natural cloud passing through its field of view. For a brief moment, the mystery seemed solved. It was a tidy, natural explanation that required no aliens and no exotic physics. However, the celebration was premature. The radio astronomy community quickly dismantled the comet hypothesis. Researchers at the finest observatories pointed out that comets indeed release hydrogen, but not in the quantities or concentrations necessary to produce a signal as strong as the WOW event. Furthermore, if comets were capable of generating such intense radio bursts, radio telescopes would be picking them up constantly. We track hundreds of comets. None of them scream across the radio spectrum like the event in 1977. Additionally, a closer look at the position of the comets revealed that while they were in the general neighborhood, they were not precisely in the beam of the Big Ear at the exact moment of detection. The final nail in the coffin for the comet theory came when astronomers pointed their telescopes at those specific comets during their subsequent returns. They listened for the radio emission. They found nothing that resembled the narrowband, high-intensity, continuous wave of the WOW signal. The comet hypothesis, while clever, ultimately failed to fit the data. It was another door that opened only to reveal a brick wall. We are also forced to consider the possibility of a secret government project, a favorite theory for any unexplained aerial phenomenon. Could it have been a spy satellite or a classified transmission? While the protected frequency argument stands, the Cold War was a time of rule breaking. However, the physics of the signal again presents a problem. A signal sent from a satellite down to Earth would typically have a Doppler shift, a change in frequency caused by the object moving toward or away from the receiver. The WOW signal showed no such shift. It was a pure, unmoving tone. For a satellite to produce a signal with no Doppler shift relative to the ground, it would have to be in a geostationary orbit, staying perfectly fixed above the telescope. But if it were geostationary, the signal would not have drifted through the beam for 72 seconds. It would have been constant. The geometry simply does not align with a man-made object orbiting the Earth. Every path leads back to the same frustrating contradictions. It looked like a signal from deep space, but it never repeated. It looked like a continuous transmission, but it cut out before the second receiver could hear it. It matched the signature of hydrogen, the most common element in the universe. Yet it was broadcast with an intensity that no natural hydrogen cloud has ever achieved. The location itself, the region of space in the constellation Sagittarius, has been scoured. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence, or SETI, has targeted that specific patch of sky with instruments far more sensitive than the Big Ear. The Very Large Array in New Mexico and the Green Bank Telescope in West Virginia have both spent hours listening to the coordinates. They have found stars, they have found galaxies, and they have found silence. There is nothing obviously remarkable about that specific direction in the galaxy. There are no nearby supernovas, no known exotic pulsars that align perfectly with the data. It is just a field of stars, quiet and indifferent to our curiosity. This collection of dead ends leaves us with an unsettled feeling. If it was a system error or a glitch in the 1970s mainframe computer, it was a glitch so precise that it perfectly mimicked the physics of the Earth's rotation. If it was a prank, it was executed by someone with a profound understanding of radio astronomy who never claimed credit. And if it was a genuine transmission from an intelligent civilization, the implications are perhaps the most disquieting of all. It suggests a universe where signals are fleeting, like a lighthouse beam sweeping across a dark ocean. We happen to be looking out the window at the exact second the light swept past. If we had been looking a minute earlier or a minute later, we would have seen nothing. The dead ends of the WOW signal investigation force us to confront the possibility that we may have missed countless other messages simply because we were blinking at the wrong time. The signal stands as a singular, unrepeatable monument to the unknown, a ghost in the data that refuses to be debunked and refuses to be explained. We are left holding a map where every road is blocked, staring at a circle of red ink that marks the spot where the universe briefly whispered and then turned away. On the night of August 15th, 1977, the universe briefly broke its silence. The location was not a high-tech command center in a mountain bunker, nor was it a sleek laboratory filled with flashing screens. It was a patch of land in Delaware, Ohio, occupied by a strange architectural contraption known as the Big Ear. This radio telescope looked less like a window to the stars and more like a massive metallic stadium that had been flattened into the ground. It was a passive instrument, a receiver that allowed the Earth's rotation to sweep its gaze across the sky, listening to the electromagnetic hum of the cosmos. At the center of this operation was Jerry Amen, a volunteer astronomer and professor who was reviewing the data logs a few days later. In those days, data did not appear as colorful visualizations on high-definition monitors. It arrived as a stream of alphanumeric characters printed onto perforated paper by an IBM computer. The machine spat out line after line of numbers and letters, representing the intensity of radio waves hitting the telescope's receivers. Most of the paper was filled with low numbers, ones and twos, indicating the background static of deep space, the electromagnetic equivalent of a quiet room. But as Eamon scanned the printout from that mid-August night, his eyes stopped on a specific vertical column. Amidst the low hum of background noise, the intensity of the signal had skyrocketed. The sequence read 6, EQUJ5. In the system used by the observatory, numbers 1 through 9 represented low intensity, while letters represented increasing strength, ascending from A to Z. The letter U was an intensity level 30 times greater than the background noise. It was a shout in a library. Eamon reached for a red pen. He circled the 6 characters on the page and wrote a single word in the margin, a reaction that would give the anomaly its famous name. Wow. The signal was not just remarkable for its volume. It was the specific characteristics of the transmission that sent a shiver through the scientific community, a sensation that lingers over 4 decades later. The transmission was narrowband, meaning the energy was concentrated into a very specific frequency. Natural cosmic events, like the collisions of stars or the emissions of gas clouds, are messy. They broadcast noise across a wide range of frequencies. Much like a lightning strike, creates static across the entire AM radio dial. This signal was different. It was precise. It was tuned. Specifically, it arrived at 1420.4 megahertz. This frequency is known to astronomers as the hydrogen line. Hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe, and when it changes energy states, it emits radio waves at exactly this frequency. It is a universal constant. If an intelligent civilization wanted to communicate across the vast distances of space, they would likely use this frequency as a hailing channel, because any astronomer on any planet would be observing it. It is often referred to as the water hole, a quiet place in the radio spectrum where sentient beings might meet. The implication was staggering. A powerful, narrowband signal arriving on the most logical frequency for interstellar communication had struck the sensors of the big ear. Furthermore, the signal's profile perfectly matched the rotation of the Earth. As the telescope swept past the source, the signal rose in intensity for 36 seconds, peaked, and then faded for 36 seconds. This created a bell curve lasting exactly 72 seconds. This timing confirmed that the signal came from a fixed point in the stars, specifically from the constellation Sagittarius, and was not a glitch within the computer or a piece of interference from a passing airplane. However, the true mystery of the WOW signal is not that it happened, but what happened next. It stopped. In the days, weeks, and years that followed, astronomers turned the big ear and other more powerful telescopes back toward that specific coordinate in Sagittarius. They listened with bated breath, waiting for a repeat of the transmission, a confirmation that would prove this was not a fluke. They heard nothing but the cold, indifferent hiss of cosmic static. The line had gone silent. This lack of repetition is what haunts the investigation. Science relies on repeatability. If a phenomenon cannot be observed twice, it is difficult to confirm its origin. The singular nature of the event opened the door to skepticism and alternative theories each attempting to explain away the unsettling possibility of an artificial source. One of the primary counter-theories involved secret military satellites. If a classified satellite had drifted through the telescope's field of view and transmitted a signal back to Earth, it might have looked like a signal from deep space. However, in 1977, satellites were prohibited from transmitting in the protected 1420 MHz band, precisely to avoid interfering with radio astronomy. While it is possible a secret project violated these protocols, the physics of the signal argue against it. A satellite moving in orbit would likely show a Doppler shift, a change in frequency caused by its motion relative to the ground. The WEL signal showed no such shift. It was steady, anchored to the background of stars. More recently, a theory emerged involving comets. In 2016, a researcher proposed that the signal might have been caused by a hydrogen cloud surrounding a pair of comets, specifically 266P/Christensen and P2008Y2, which were transiting the area at the time. The idea was that the sun's ultraviolet light broke apart the frozen water on the comets, creating a vast cloud of hydrogen that emitted the signal. It was a comforting, natural explanation that sought to close the book on the mystery. Yet, upon deeper investigative scrutiny, the comet theory began to fray. Radio astronomers pointed out that comets do emit radio waves, but not at the intensity observed in 1977. Furthermore, if comets could generate such a powerful, narrow-band signal, radio telescopes should be detecting wow signals constantly as comets traverse the solar system. They do not. The signal remains unique, an outlier that refuses to be neatly categorized as a ball of dirty ice. This leaves us with the uncomfortable residue of the unknown. We are left with a set of facts that do not fit comfortably into our understanding of the natural world. We have a signal that looked for all the world like an artificial transmission. It used a frequency associated with mathematics and nature's fundamental elements. It came from a region of space dense with stars. It was powerful enough to be detected by the primitive equipment of the 1970s, and it happened only once. The psychological impact of this singularity cannot be overstated. It evokes the feeling of a phone ringing in an empty house in the middle of the night. You pick it up and there is silence. Was it a wrong number? Was it a prank? Or was it someone trying to reach you with vital news, only for the connection to be severed? The big ear was listening, but perhaps we were not ready to hear. There is also the possibility that the signal was a sweeping beacon. Imagine a lighthouse beam rotating across the ocean. If you are on a ship, you see the flash of light only when the beam sweeps directly past your eyes. If an extraterrestrial transmitter We're scanning the galaxy like a lighthouse. The beam might sweep over Earth only once every few centuries. We might have just happened to have our receiver turned on at the exact second the beam hit our planet. If this is the case, the sender is not gone. They are simply facing another direction, and we are waiting for the light to return. The location in Sagittarius is roughly 1,800 light years away. If the signal was a message, it left its source around the time the Roman Empire was at its height. It traveled through the vacuum for nearly 2 millennia before washing over a cornfield in Ohio. If we were to send a reply today, it would not arrive until the year 3824. The distances involved render a conversation impossible in any human time frame. We are not talking. We are archaeological observers of a fleeting moment in galactic history. The Big Ear Observatory no longer exists. The land where it stood was sold and developed into a golf course. The metal mesh that once caught the whisper of the universe was dismantled, but the data remains. The sequence 6, EQUJ5, is etched into the history of astronomy, a permanent question mark. As we continue to build more sensitive arrays and listen to broader swathes of the sky, the WOW signal serves as a reminder of our profound ignorance. We scan the heavens looking for patterns, for logic, for something that mirrors ourselves. For 72 seconds, the universe seemed to look back. Whether it was a cosmic accident, a misunderstood natural phenomenon, or a genuine greeting from a distant intelligence, the result is the same. It woke us up. It forced us to consider the silence that surrounds us not as an empty void, but as a room full of potential conversations that we have not yet learned how to hear. The signal has faded, but the listening continues, driven by the lingering hope that next time, the phone will ring twice.